Resident Evil is a huge, and I mean huge franchise. Just counting the fully released games, there are more than 50, and that doesn't even include browser games, card or board games, or demos, which also often have differences to the main games. And then there are of course also both live action and animated movies, shows, books, comics, audio dramas, stage plays which are canon and add to the lore. Anything you can think of, Resident Evil has done it. And since I'm mostly done with the main series, only missing the Outbreak games, I needed to defeat this empty feeling somehow, and turn to the mobile games. This is part 1 of a small video series in which I'm planning to review them all. Subscribe to not miss the other ones, and also to help me out. My channel is tiny, so I would appreciate any support. Today I'll focus on Java phones, or button phones I guess, whatever you want to call them really. So, from the tiniest shoot-em-ups to actual survival horror, I am Jen, and these are the Resident Evil Java games. The first one ever, Resident Evil ZombieBuster, originally came out in 2001 in Japan, but in the West only in 2006. And there is nothing I could say about this game that you don't already see. This is how it plays, there is nothing else to it, except that you get to choose between Claire and Leon. Leon is stronger, Claire is faster. I didn't play this game for long, for obvious reasons, but it has 3 levels that just loop continuously while getting harder, with a boss fight at the end of each level. First the Tyrant, then the Snake from Resident Evil 1, and then a bunch of crows. Gameplay-wise it makes sense to have them in this order, but conceptually, you want to tell me that a bunch of crows are more dangerous and menacing than Tyrant? But it's interesting to see Resident Evil 2 characters fight a Resident Evil 1 boss in an official game. And there's even a remake. It came out in 2011 in Japan only and looks way prettier. But that's about all I can say about it since, as far as I know, it's probably lost media. Maybe the better graphics would have made the game more fun, but I don't know. And I'm not even trying to say that it's a bad game per se. You have to consider that it came out in 2001. Mobile games were barely even a thing back then, like Snake came out in 1997. ZombieBuster does a very specific thing, and it's not horrible at it. I appreciated details like the level transitions being these door animations, or that you can actually select your character. I can see people killing some time with it back in the day, but from today's perspective, or even 2011, no idea what they were thinking with the remake, and especially with how much you have to mash the button because it feels like all the enemies have infinite health, it just doesn't offer any value anymore. But at least it can take up some time in this video, I guess. A year later, in 2002, Resident Evil Assault the Nightmare released in Japan, while internationally it only came out in 2004, so 2 years before ZombieBuster. And this game honestly just feels like they took ZombieBuster and tried to make it first person. It's basically the same game, with some changes like having to reload manually, getting a few different weapons, and most importantly, the zombies having less health. There are also keys, health, and ammo you can collect now, and there is sort of a small story here, where you go through this castle and fight a licker at the end. Interestingly as Chris and not Leon, so here we have a Resident Evil 1 character fighting a Resident Evil 2 enemy, kind of flipping the script. And at the end you get one of 4 endings in which you rescue different people. No endless mode, just 4 endings. And that's really all there is to talk about here. It's more fun than ZombieBuster. The anime-inspired look was pretty interesting, and I still love the door opening animation as a level transition. But it's still just a time waster and should be viewed as such. It's good enough for its time, but I don't see anyone playing it nowadays. Or ever since smartphones were a thing, really. Resident Evil Confidential Report is a 4-part series from 2006. Yep, all 4 games came out in the same year, and it makes sense seeing how it's kind of one big game that they had to split up because the platform is just too limited. They are isometric, turn-based, and, weirdly enough, have tank controls. You go through different areas divided into separate rooms, kill zombies, look for items and lore texts, save the game with typewriters. They almost feel like proper Resident Evil games. Not arcadey mobile games from back in the day like ZombieBuster and Assault the Nightmare, but proper games that just happened to release on a much more limited platform. And I kinda can't believe it. This is not just a nice change of pace from the previous games, it's just straight up amazing compared to them. And my weakness for turn-based stuff also helps. Kinda like in Resident Evil 2, all 4 of these games, or files as they're called, feature 2 characters with their own original stories that are somehow connected. Tyler is a new police officer who has to reach the police station, and Naomi is an FBI agent who is investigating the cover-ups that seem to be happening with Umbrella, starting at the police station, and they meet halfway through. While Tyler's story is just to reach this one place, Naomi's gets much deeper. Without spoilers, I was genuinely intrigued and wanted to see where it was going. It's not incredibly deep or anything, obviously, look at it. But it was interesting. I liked it. In terms of locations, this game is the same across both playthroughs, just in opposite directions. Naomi has a little more to see, but it's really not much. And it's cool that the doors are unlocked after meeting the other character, because of course you do that during their respective playthroughs. Enemies and items are still there, or there again I guess, which makes less sense, but at least there is some attention to detail. And in general, it's just a cool idea that they meet at all. And an extremely interesting thing about this game is that you get to fight human enemies in Naomi's chapter as well, making it, as far as I know, the first ever Resident Evil game to do that. And she only encounters them after meeting Tyler, so it makes sense, they started exploring after he was gone. They will be common enemies in the other games, also in Tyler's chapters, and they increase the difficulty a little compared to zombies, so I appreciated them in general. And I love how they're just chilling with zombie dogs the first time you see them. That aside, you also get to fight dogs and lickers here. So far, this game is by far the closest we have gotten to a proper Resident Evil. I respect that, especially the decision to make it turn-based, making sure that there is no confusion in what you're doing. And if you make a mistake, it's your own fault and not the game moving faster than you can react. If anything, it can feel pretty slow sometimes, because you have to wait for all the enemies to do their actions if you're in the same room. It didn't bother me too much, but is definitely something to note. And more annoyingly, if you want to keep going forward, you have to spam the button, even if you're alone in the room. You can't just keep it pressed, turn-based and all. I don't know what it is with survival horror, but I just love the genre. So much so that I even played the first campaign in one go, even though I only wanted to take a quick look at first. Is what I would say if I'd actually done that. What happened though is, I died near the end. Which wouldn't be a problem, this game has plenty of typewriters, so dying is really not that big of a deal. Or it wouldn't be if the game didn't have permadeath. Because saving is only for continuing after closing it. If you die, you have to start from the beginning. That is super frustrating because I had no reason to think that was the case. You can work around it by closing and reopening the game whenever you're about to die, but that first death left a very bitter taste, especially because it happened so late. This could be a real deal breaker, especially with how small the target audience already is from today's perspective. The game being so short definitely helps. It took me about 40 minutes or so per campaign, and there are plenty of items around, but just be careful. Still, I kinda wish they'd left out Tyler's chapter entirely and fleshed out Naomi's story a bit more. While Tyler feels like a typical faceless protagonist I wouldn't mind under normal circumstances, Naomi's story is just way more interesting, or rather, interesting at all. I feel like cutting out Tyler and doubling Naomi's screen time, story, and locations you visit would have benefited the game a lot, as well as the inclusion of maps. This game doesn't have any. None of them do. It doesn't need any, because the locations are so small and linear, there are only a few branching paths and they're barely worth mentioning, but it would have been a cool detail for survival horror fans. Overall, I had a good time playing it, and would recommend it to anyone intrigued by the gameplay. It's not the best thing ever, but I love having a new, interesting story with new characters set in Raccoon City. It really feels like they were trying their best to adapt this series for mobile phones, and they more or less succeeded in my opinion. It's a nice time waster with an interesting story, and sometimes that's all you need. And the fact that they made more of these kinda warms my heart. They could have just made File 1 and called it a day, but they didn't. This makes the characters feel more fleshed out, with their own struggles in Raccoon City, and not like random one-off characters that contribute nothing to the franchise. But before we get to File 2, let's take a detour and talk about Resident Evil: The Missions. It came out in 2003, with a 3D version releasing in 2005, and you play as Jill, who has to kill zombies and hunters and stuff in the famous police station, and that's really it. The actual missions always try to change things up with time trials, surviving for long enough, collecting herbs by killing and looting zombies, just killing zombies, and so on, but it all boils down to the same thing. You kill enemies with the occasional boss fight against Nemesis. At the start of each level you get to choose your equipment, get a weapon assigned, and shoot enemies in different ways depending on the weapon. With the pistol you have to wait for a bit to aim properly and deal maximum damage, with the shotgun you don't have to do that but can only shoot twice before reloading, and so on. If you don't shoot a zombie for too long, their charge fills up and they attack you. To empty it, you have to shoot them. It's really simple. You also get healing items and grenades to help you out, but I rarely use them. After finishing a level you see this monstrosity. Yep, this game has 100 levels, and you always choose which of the next 2 or 3 you want to play next. And thanks to this formula, there is no real story, only some flavor text at the start of each level, even though these texts often build up on each other, so you can have your own little inconsequential adventure that is always a little different, and that was pretty cool. Almost like a roguelike. And after finishing one of the climatic final levels, you get this screen, unlock something new, and see your stats. And then the game memorizes the path you already took and you can take another one. From the beginning. Always. You can't just choose a different branching path, so if you're only missing one final level, you still have to play through the whole game to get there. It didn't bother me too much because I found the game kind of fun, but I can see people being turned off by that, so keep that in mind. And after beating all the levels, you finally get to play them in any order you want, which I appreciate, but I don't see myself ever doing. Just like with all roguelikes, this game lost its appeal once I unlocked everything. There was no reason for me to go back to, nothing else to unlock or to see. So for the time being it was fun enough, and I appreciate it, despite all the similarities, that no two levels are the exact same. Of course this game isn't great. I'd probably give it like a 4 out of 10 if I had to. But the levels being as short as they are, it kind of is the perfect toilet break game. But at the same time I'm glad that it only has 100 levels. Because look at this monster from the 3D one. This version has very different gameplay and almost feels like its own game. You walk around the RPD, often multiple screens, not just single rooms, and the levels can actually get pretty big. That surprised me a lot considering it came out on this thing. It almost feels like you're playing a proper old-school Resident Evil game, but on your phone. Without tank controls, which kinda irritated me at first, and without the puzzles, but you know what I mean. Unless the mission asks for it, you don't have to kill a single zombie in this game, just like in the mainline games. Aiming is done automatically, but zombies can get pretty bullet spongy, and with only 15 bullets in your pistol, it's very likely that you'll be running away a lot in the beginning, sometimes getting caught by one and having to push it away, just like in the mainline games. You also get ratings at the end of each level that you can then see in the menu, and you can see your health bar by pausing the game. Jill even has a different walking animation at low health, just like in the... you get it. Compared to the 2D version, you unlock more items because there are way more levels here, and you get to choose your weapon at the start of each level. I appreciate that, but that aside, there isn't a lot this game has to offer, including fun. I actually didn't really enjoy my time with this one. I don't think these old phones are a good platform for a 3D Resident Evil game, and this game just proves that. Movement feels weird, aiming seems unreliable, with zombies sometimes just walking out of it. There are dead ends contributing nothing except frustration when the zombie happens to follow you through the tight corridor. Playing this game just wasn't a pleasant experience. Which is why I didn't finish it. I didn't even come close. I played enough to get a grasp of it, but really don't want to waste any more of my time with it. The mission's 3D screams Resident Evil with everything it does, which I can't claim about the 2D one. That one was an action-oriented shooter first and Resident Evil second. This one feels like a Resident Evil game first, but it's just too lackluster. It tried being a mix between the 2D one and the proper Resident Evil game, but ended up failing in both regards. But you know what? There's more. 3 sequels called The Stories, The Episodes, and The Operations. All 3 are probably lost media though, and seeing how similar they seem to the missions based on the screenshots that survived, maybe it's for the better. I don't know if I would want to play another game like this, especially in short succession like I did with all these games for this video. But it's still a shame to see fully released games just get lost to time because Japan's copyright laws are just that restrictive according to someone who spent a good chunk of their life there. Many of these mobile games were never archived because it could have gotten those people in serious trouble, and eventually they got taken down, leaving behind only screenshots, articles, and that kind of stuff. The only one we have any real info on is the first sequel, The Stories, because someone actually managed to dig up a demo of the game in 2023. That is incredible, and maybe we'll even get to see the full version at some point, but I wasn't able to find a download link of the demo, so if you have one, please let me know. And while I'm at it, I might as well mention some other games that are probably lost media for that same reason. The ZombieBuster remake I mentioned earlier already. As I only found out after recording this, there is also a version of the Resident Evil 4 smartphone game for button phones, but that was also Japan exclusive and therefore lost media. Then we have Biohazard I Survivor, which is sort of an RPG as far as I can tell. Biohazard Zombie Shooter, which might not be the biggest loss. And Biohazard Survival Door, which somehow looks even more boring. So let's just move on to Resident Evil Confidential Report File 2, which takes place 2 days after File 1. Tyler receives a distress call from a dorm and goes to investigate, but he suspects that there is more to it than just a few trapped students, so he also goes to the university to see what's up there. The premise alone is already more interesting than his entire story in the first game, and I was genuinely intrigued this time. But you know, it was pretty hard to concentrate on this story when there was another, arguably more interesting one, just waiting for me with Naomi. Let's be honest, would you rather play an original story that looks pretty interesting, or the continuation of a story you're already invested in? Naomi also gets the call, but suspects that it's somehow connected to her mission from File 1, so she continues investigating, of course starting at the university, going to the dorm, and running into Tyler halfway through. As a survival horror set piece, this dorm was a really cool and creative one, and the next best thing to the one I keep wishing for, an orphanage. We got one in the Silent Hill button phone game, but can we please get a full 3D survival horror game that has an orphanage as one of its main locations? Am I the only one who thinks that would be a no-brainer? Anyway, I really enjoyed the dorm here and was pretty sad when I had to leave it, kinda like in many Resident Evil games, where the first location is usually the best one. The mansion, RPD, train, baker house, the list goes on. The university is still pretty cool, but it just doesn't compare in my opinion. Gameplay-wise, it's the same thing, but I feel like the locations were improved a little. The areas have more branching paths, the typewriters are more spread out, and there were more locked doors I had to find keys for. That reminded me of Silent Hill, where most locked doors could only be opened by very specific keys, making the games feel more linear than the rather open Resident Evil games, where keys typically open multiple doors and you choose where to go. But this Silent Hill approach somehow still feels much more open than File 1, because there are more rooms to explore and not mostly just a straight path, and I like that a lot. In terms of enemies, we don't fight dogs and lickers anymore, instead we have these giant silverfish and bats. That kind of felt like a massive downgrade, just like the weapons. Much like the first game, we start off with a pistol and find more weapons as we go along. The problem is, though, this game only takes place 2 days later. So you want to tell me that both characters somehow managed to lose all their weapons in just 2 days? And I didn't like that Naomi's campaign was noticeably shorter than the first game. Or a pretty bullshitty puzzle, I guess, that kinda came out of nowhere? You just have to interact with an object in the environment, which is no problem on its own. Survival horror games do that all the time. But these games haven't done that before. It was always obvious what you can and can't interact with. The environment was just the environment and nothing more, and suddenly it is more. And the game never tells you that, so I got stuck for a bit. So, if you play as Tyler, remember the library and thank me later. I also hated how Tyler's story ended. It just felt like a cheap rehash of Naomi's story from File 1, just further confirming that Tyler's story feels like an afterthought, to make the game longer I guess, and give it that classic feeling of having two characters, instead of just fleshing out Naomi's story more and making it even better that way. I don't mind playing both campaigns, I found these games fun enough for that, but so far Tyler's stories feel more like filler. Maybe that'll change, seeing the cliffhanger in this chapter here, but maybe not. I guess we'll see. Overall, while the game is an improvement over the first one in some aspects, it's a letdown in others. I would say their quality is about the same on average, but the first one managed to find a balance, while the second one had some really good and some really bad things. I like the balanced approach more. Nonetheless, File 2 is a solid continuation, so definitely play it if you like the first one. Another day has passed, both characters somehow lost all their weapons except the pistols again, and there was a police alarm at the museum. That's where this entire game takes place, just in different locations of it. Tyler's chapter gets a bit more interesting here, with a suspicious character dropping a vial and an armed soldier acting strange about it. His story is finally starting to get interesting, despite Naomi basically treating him like a background character and telling him to go away after he tells her about his weird encounters. But I'm finally intrigued by his story, something the first two games weren't able to achieve, so let's see how the next and last one handles it. As Naomi, we once again investigate stuff, and we once again get way more story and background info than Tyler, but, funnily enough, his role to the overall story is even more important and more interesting in her chapter than in his own. His role in this game is actually complemental to her story this time around, actually making it feel like it was planned to have both characters. This is the first game where I would actually recommend not only to play both chapters, but also to play Tyler's chapter first, to have a more complete story. Even though I have to say that I would have liked it even more if both stories complemented each other, instead of this one-sided approach. That's not to say that her story isn't interesting though, because with the soldiers killing anyone who knows anything, and now also being after Tyler, now that he met the informant and has a vial, there seems to be more going on than you might think. Or you already expected it because it's a Resident Evil game. Look, all I'm trying to say is that the story is more intriguing than I expected from a button phone game, okay? And I love how creative the locations are getting. First a dorm, now a museum. I'm genuinely curious what's next. And the museum is also more complex than the dorm, and I would say it has now reached a level where a map could have actually been implemented and made sense. It's still not crazy complicated, but much more than the previous games. I'd say it's right on the line between being able to play it comfortably without a map, and needing a map to be able to play it comfortably. Especially seeing how Naomi gets to see one more room than Tyler. I'm joking obviously, but yes, she does get to see one more room, I guess. And they got rid of those weird enemy types from the second game and brought back lickers and dogs. Overall, I like this one more than File 2, probably on par with 1. It felt longer, had a more meaningful story, the location is more complex with more rooms to explore and more branching paths, and there are no bullshit puzzles here. So let's see what the last one has to offer. But first, another detour to Resident Evil Degeneration, named after the animated movie this is an adaptation of. There is a smartphone version that some people might have heard of and that we will take a look at in a future video, but also a lesser known button phone game, which is a different game, more limited platform and all. So I rewatched the movie, which by the way is my favorite Resident Evil movie, with some people in my Discord to properly compare the two, and we all had a great time. It's a great and in my opinion underrated movie, especially that beginning at the airport always stood out to me. Such a cool setting for zombie stuff. Seeing how the animated movies are canon to the game, Degeneration being basically Resident Evil 4.5, and this is an adaptation of it, I guess it's not canon? Kind of funny that a game inside of a game franchise isn't canon, but a movie is. Anyway, we don't get to play as or see Claire, the protagonist of the movie, and instead play as Leon, who also showed up in the movie, I guess, but come on. Claire is my favorite Resident Evil character, so I would have liked to see her here. And other characters from the movie didn't show up either. It really is just Resident Evil 4 Leon and the person he communicates with before every mission. He has to deal with another special agent mission, or whatever he is now, and the game is actually in 3D. But wait, doesn't this look like the mission 3D? And yes it does. The gameplay is the exact same. The ability to choose your loadout before every level, the timer on top, the things you do are unlocked, even the sound design is the exact same. And the worst part, so are the levels. Like, the actual layouts and everything. I'm actually kind of mad about it. I was excited for another original game, but what the hell is this? It had such potential, but ended up being a reskinned and, I guess, more linear The Missions 3D, with how you don't get to pick between 2 or 3 missions this time and you can always go back to any previous one. The only good thing compared to The Missions 3D are quality of life improvements in both the UI, which now shows your health, and gameplay. Improvements that actually kept me engaged long enough to play through the entire thing. All 50 levels. On this map. Yes, we get a map before every mission, and yes, it's cool, but look at the size of it. It's tiny. And it's always the same one, just the starting location is often different, mostly seemingly at random. Sometimes it actually makes sense, like when you're told to go to the boarding area in mission 8 and then mission 9 takes place there. Or sometimes missions entirely take place in just one of the rooms. So things are changed up as much as they can really be, but the point is that we only have 7 or so rooms and a few hallways for 50 levels. I love that it takes place on an airport, and most missions being super short, down to literally 5 seconds in level 38, helps, but it still got old after a while. And the developers seem to agree, seeing how they struggle to come up with missions for some of the later levels. Like the one where Leon has to fight zombies with a knife, just for the fun of it? Like, what? Do you want him to die, Ingrid? This is a pretty serious zombie situation. Or the one where Leon has to take out multiple zombies with one shot. I'm not joking, that is the mission. Like, hello? Isn't it dangerous to fuck around like that? Why practice trick shots in real life in an enclosed space? I don't think I need to say that there's barely any story in here. There are a few missions inspired by the movie, but the game mostly just takes the setting and does its own thing with it. Go there, kill that, collect things there, nothing too special or creative. A few times it was even just glorified tutorials. Enemies are zombies, dogs, and the occasional tyrant boss fight, of which only zombies appeared in the movie by the way, but the developers had to come up with something, so it's fine. And at the end, after killing all the remaining enemies and escaping for good, it's over. You finally saved the day, I guess. This is not a good game. I didn't have any fun playing it, and I don't think I'm surprising anyone by saying this. It was just playable enough for me to finish, and actually had a clear goal in contrary to... I don't think I will ever play it again, but if you really want to experience this type of gameplay, and with the stories, the episodes, and the operations being lost media, this is as good as it gets. But really, don't waste your time. Can we get a proper survival horror game in an airport setting though? Please? And you know what happened when I was almost done playing Degeneration, the one game I was still missing for this video? And I was happy to finally wrap it up and start recording? I found out about a 2D version of it. One that plays the exact same as the 2D The Missions, has the exact same story as the 3D version of this game, though I only compared the first 3 levels, and it's kinda funny that Leon doesn't know what green herbs do, and also has 50 levels. Just like The Missions 2D, it's much shorter and more fun than its 3D counterpart. It has some slight tweaks like a different weapon and grenades, the UI is slightly different, you can't choose the weapon before starting, there's only one location per level, so even less variety than the 3D one because you actually move around there, but with how much shorter this game is it almost didn't bother me. What you have to do was adapt it to the different format of course, so it's mostly just killing zombies or surviving for some time again, and that's really about it. This is basically The Missions 2D, but with different backdrops and less levels. I still like the airport setting, so that was a nice breath of fresh air, but not enough to actually stand out or make me recommend it. It's the same game. One more day has passed in the world of Confidential Report, and Tyler is now completely isolated, with instructions to go to the research facility. And honestly, what did I expect? Of course the last location of the series is a lab. It's a Resident Evil game. I'm kind of disappointed because the creativity of the second and third games is gone, but I'm also really not surprised because it's just such an integral part of the series. After losing all his weapons except the pistol yet again, he goes to investigate the place that was meant for survivors, only to find zombies and special forces and stuff. And you know what? This game finally managed to do what the third game tried. It made Tyler feel important. Like a character who finally actually contributes to the story. And his story is actually interesting. Maybe not as interesting as Naomi's, and maybe my standards have been lowered by the games not really doing anything with him until now, but his chapter in this game was really refreshing, and I would, like in the third one, actually recommend playing it for story purposes here, not just for gameplay. Naomi's story is the climatic finale. As expected, it bears more weight than Tyler's, seeing how it was built up over the course of 3 previous games and not just one. And it reaches a satisfying conclusion in my opinion. I liked where it headed, and I like that there was actually a proper ending this time. A finished 4-part series and not just random games that eventually stopped releasing. The design of the lab is also pretty cool. The rooms look interesting, the layout of them is intriguing, there is random stuff to interact with, making the world feel more realistic, much like the 3D survival horror games. I like these destroyed environments, there is a completely new weapon type. All 3 games so far had a lot of different weapons, but they were always of the same types, like shotguns and pistols. This game introduces a whole new type. The story is interesting and finds a satisfying conclusion, Tyler's chapter feels meaningful and complementary to Naomi's and vice versa, it didn't feel too long or too short. Overall, I would say that this is the best game of the series, and it's not even that close. This one also feels the closest to 3D survival horror games, with all the things you have to interact with. In the second game, it was just a library. Here, interacting with the environment is an integral part of Naomi's chapter, and it's introduced way better by encouraging me to do it with the level design, and because I was exploring anyway, I found certain things on accident. It's not at all what this game series has been doing so far, and it still feels a bit out of place, but it also feels good to finally have it for real and not just a single interaction, especially now that it's properly implemented. But if you have the wrong expectations and play it like you did all the other ones, it's very easy to not interact with anything, miss important things, and then walk around aimlessly for a long time. That's actually how I played it for the first time a few years ago. I ended up having to restart the entire chapter several times because enemies respawn after a while, and I ended up using up all of my resources, making progress impossible. I just didn't expect such a shift after playing through 7 chapters that all combined only did it a single time before. So be warned, Naomi's chapter is about as close to a proper survival horror game as these button phone games can probably get. You will have to explore, and you will have to save ammo and healing items as much as possible to make it through, because those are also much more scarce than before. And this actually made me want to play more survival horror games for these button phones. This whole journey was pretty fun, and I appreciate that they tried to tell an actual story here. Good stuff. These aren't the best games ever, but they are nice time wasters, fun enough for a bus or train ride, and actually have a proper ending that also happens to be in the best game of the series. That's pretty good if you ask me. Just don't play them too much at a time. I'm not gonna lie, they started feeling pretty tedious because I tried to get through them as quickly as possible for this video. Play them like I did a few years ago, in short bursts, and you'll be fine. By the way, I also loved random moments like Tyler just standing around surrounded by all these monsters, or how I stormed in the middle of the action here. Not sure where else I would mention this, but I appreciated these details. If Capcom ever remembers about these, a remake with all 4 games in a single package, maybe even as one game, would be amazing as a spin-off of the remake series. Like, there were even boss fights in most of the chapters. I know there is no way they would ever do that, but one can dream, right? Now, you might have noticed that I left a game out. Resident Evil Genesis, which is an actual adaptation of the first Resident Evil game, an official demake. That's because I wanted to give it its own spotlight. Confidential Report is cool, but Genesis is conceptually, arguably even more interesting. So you can expect a video where I review and compare it to both the original Resident Evil and its remake. The script is already finished. Stay tuned. And with that, thank you so much for watching. Please let me know which one seemed the most interesting to you, and have you ever heard of any of these? Maybe you even have some nostalgia for some of them. I would love to hear about it. Don't forget to subscribe to not miss any future videos, and like this one to help me out. Again, my channel is super small and I would love to grow it a bit more. This is exactly the kind of content you can expect on here, obscure things in big franchises, like my God of War and Silent Hill videos. Also check out my Twitch stream, I might actually be live right now. All links are in the description. Have a wonderful day, or night, or whatever, and goodbye. Alter, ich hab's geschafft.